Identifying security threats. So, as we were working on the Security Plus and as a security professional, there are going to be many different um, aspects to this, right? Where you're going to harden systems, we're going to monitor systems, we're going to respond to attacks, try to deter attackers, right? That's everything that goes along with security. However, in order to be effective and to so that we can fight threats, we have to understand what type of threats are out there, what type of vulnerabilities are out there, right? So in this lesson, we are going to learn to identify types of attackers, identify social engineering attacks, identify malware, identify software based threats, identify network based threats, wireless threats, and physical threats. All right, so first up, we have hackers and attackers. So, the word hacker uh, didn't always mean something malicious, right? Originally, it was just a term for someone who was really skilled in computer programming or sysadmin or something like that, right? And so it was a technical skill. But gradually it became associated with illegal and malicious system intrusions. So under those terms, a hacker and an attacker are interchangeable, right? They're individuals who have the skills to gain access to computer systems through unauthorized or unapproved means. And then we have a cracker. So a cracker is an individual who breaks encryption codes, defeats software copy protections, or just specializes in breaking into systems. So sometimes you'll see cracker and as hacker interchanged. However, for the most part, it's going to be people who are breaking encryption codes or copy protections. So when I say copy protections, I mean um, getting pirated software. So that pirated software, and a lot of times nowadays it has copyright protections on them, right? Because people know that people were pirating so much software that they put copyright protections on them to try to cut down on that. They might have been entering some sort of codes that was going to unlock the system or whatever the case is, or maybe even calling the internet, calling a server somewhere to make sure somebody hasn't isn't using a pirated software. So what crackers do is work around those copyright protections a lot of times. So let's say a PlayStation 4, Xbox, whatever. Those have what's called a DRM on them. So a DRM is meant to stop someone from using pirated software. Or pirated video game or something. So it means digital rights management. And when you get a Kindle book or something like that, usually it has a digital rights DRM on it. When you get a download video games off the internet, or like directly to your PlayStation, or if you get a CD, so those CDs for the PlayStations, even the reason you have to upload it to your PlayStation or Xbox first, and then use the disc is because the DRM material is on there. So the PlayStation is going to look for that DRM material and to prove that this isn't a pirated version. So a cracker is going to work around that and allow you to use pirated versions. And so that's the same thing that's going on with most stuff that people torrent or something like that. There is some sort of workaround. Maybe if you're getting Adobe Photoshop, Creative Cloud, it they unlock it and then keep it from calling the internet to make sure that you had paid for the software. So moving on from that, there are different types of so-called hackers. So we have white, black, and gray. Going with those white, black, and gray. A white hat is going to be a hacker who discovers and exposes security flaws in applications and operating systems with the organization's consent, so they can be fixed before they become widespread problems. So that's going to be our pen testers, right? Um, they have the consent of the manufacturer. They've been brought on to look for ways through the system. A black hat is going to be someone who discovers and exposes security vulnerabilities without the organization's consent. Now, this is going to usually be, well, it's going to be for some sort of malicious purpose or financial gain, whatever you want to call it. So those, when we say the word hacker, we're usually referring or thinking about a black hat hacker, right? And then we have gray hats. So a gray hat is doing the same stuff, right? They're exposing security flaws in applications and operating systems without consent, once again. However, not necessarily for malicious purposes. Maybe they're just seeing how good they can crack things, right? Maybe they're proving their skills to a company, or maybe they're um, simply looking for information, right? They want to know secrets, right? But the purpose here, the main thing to know is that they don't have consent to do this. So it is illegal, even though they may not necessarily be trying to hurt or do something um, wrong. So this is a morally ambiguous arena here, right? Threat actors. So, a threat actor is an entity that is partially or wholly responsible for an incident that affects or has the potential to affect an organization's security. So, actors are going to also be referred to as a malicious actor, right? So, then we have several different types of threat actors. We have script kiddies. Script kiddies are inexperienced hackers that have a limited technical knowledge, and they're gonna rely on automated tools to hack, or maybe pre-written scripts, right? Um, so they're just getting started, basically, right? Then we have hacktivists. So a hacktivist is someone who gains access unauthorized and causes disruptions in a computer system, and they're doing this to achieve some sort of political or social change, right? So a hacktivist would be people like Anonymous feels as though they're a hacktivist, right? Or maybe um, Greenpeace or somebody like that. Greenpeace is a ecological organization that is sometimes linked with eco terrorism and stuff like that. So they would feel as though that um, they feel as though they're activists. Some governments don't think they are. I believe they've had a couple hacks in which they were doing it for the social good, right, or political good, or ecological good. Um, organized crime. Organized crime. This is going to be a group of individuals engaging in criminal activity together for a common monetary profit. Uh, Not too long ago, there were a group of people around the globe that all were able to access ATMs and take out as much money as they wanted. This happened to around a couple of cities across the globe at the same time. And the way they were caught is they decided to post up a bunch of videos on the internet holding, big stacks of cash as they were still driving around hitting new ATMs, and so it kind of linked to their whole network there. Um, then we have nation states. So a nation state is a government intelligence agency, maybe NSA, maybe CIA. It could even be the U.S. Army Cyber Command and stuff like that. So they are using cyber threats to achieve their military goals or political goals. So not too long ago, well, a few years ago, the United States, in conjunction with Israel, released the Stuxnet worm, and that was used to take down Iran's nuclear um, nuclear reactors, I believe it was, or nuclear enrichment program, right? So that was a worm designed by nation states. Then we have insiders. So an insider threat originates from within the targeted organization. They can be like past employees, they can be present employees, they can be contractors, partners, but they have access to confidential information, and they use that ability to maybe steal money from the company, or maybe do any of the other things that we talked about earlier, hacktivism, or even organized crime. So when it comes to insiders who are also a hacktivist, well, they're also they maybe also be nation states, but at least in this point, I'm speaking about uh, Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning, right? So these two people were government employees. Um, Chelsea Manning through the United States Army, and um, what's the name? Edward Snowden as a NSA CIA contractor, right? So Chelsea Manning, he released a whole bunch of videos and documents from the war in Iraq, and Afghanistan. Um, Even though he was a low level soldier, he was able to access these files and release them to WikiLeaks. He may have felt as though he was a hacktivist. I believe that's what he thought he was doing. Um, and then we have Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden, we should all know what he did by now. Edward Snowden revealed the extent of the NSA's surveillance capabilities on the U.S.'s own citizens, and it seems as though they are collecting every cell phone call, every text message um, that's made in the U.S. And so he would have been a hacktivist. Um, he would have been an insider, and he may actually fall under nation state as well, just because he was a part of actually building this surveillance system as an NSA contractor himself. Actually, he worked for a couple agencies. So moving forward, so our script kiddie, once again, inexperienced, limited technical knowledge, uses automated tools. Hacktivists, they are hacking to achieve some sort of political or social change. Insiders, these are present and past employees. They have access to confidential information. So there are several attributes, um, and each type of threat actor can have a different attribute, and these can help us to detect and deter attacks. But also, for the purposes of your quiz, um, you'll may get a question about attributes, and then you have to identify what type of threat actor that is, right? So, a script kiddie is a primarily external threat actor. The level of sophistication is that the script kiddie is going to use simple means such as code samples, automated attacks that are freely available on the internet to start their attack. And so the tools that script kiddies use are known as script kiddie tools, and they're also used by security professionals themselves for testing things, right? Vulnerability scanners, stuff like that. They're not going to have much funding. It's going to be minimal, and the intent that they have is usually to um, gain some sort of attention or improve technical abilities or low level monetary value goals, right? And next up, we have hacktivists. They're an external um, They're external to an organization, usually, primarily. The level of sophistication is going to vary, right? That means some of them may be very skilled, some of them may not be. Their resourcing and funding is going to vary. Maybe, if they're a larger group, they may have good funding, or maybe if they're tied to somebody with money, they might have good funding, but maybe not. And so the goal here is going to be motivated by a desire to cause some sort of social change, maybe to get media attention for that social change, promote a message or something, right? Maybe they log on to, I don't know, the FDA's website and um, post messages talking about, stop animal testing or something like that, right? That would be replacing the information and trying to gain attention, right? They might want to damage an organization that they think is socially irresponsible or something like that, right? So maybe they try to take down um, some sort of website where people are selling chemicals that hurt the environment or something like that. So they try to take that website down, right? Um, Organized crime, that's going to be an external threat. They're going to be highly sophisticated because they are organized, right? They're going to be amply funded. Hopefully, well, not hopefully, but hopefully in their case, in order to do what they want to do. But they might also be amply funded because, you know, the people backing them want them to do something in order to get money, right? They might have backing of somebody that has good amount of funds to continue to facilitate that their crime organization. Um, so the primary intent is going to be monetary profits. A big target that they go for is going to be personally identifiable information because this type of data can be sold for a profit, right? Um, so that way they can steal identities, things like that, right? When it comes to nation states, these are going to be external, right? It's another nation. They're highly sophisticated. They're amply funded. They have the backing of an entire nation, right? And their intent or motivation is going to be um government sponsored. So it's normally going to be political, military, technical, maybe even an economic agenda, right? They might want to crash another nation's economy. Who knows? Um, Insiders. So an insider is going to be internal. Their level of sophistication is going to vary, right? So we had Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. Edward Snowden would have had a high level of sophistication. He had helped build some of the NSA surveillance systems, whereas though Chelsea Manning was a army private and would have had a low level of sophistication. He simply had access to a lot of things. Um, their resourcing and funding is going to vary in this case because an insider doesn't necessarily have a bunch of money. The resources might not be that great depending on what level of access they have to their organization, right? So that's going to vary. And then their intent or motivation is going to be revenge primarily, monetary gain. It could be unintentional. Um, It could be something, some sort of goal they're trying to attain uh, as a result of their personal political beliefs, just like it was with Manning and Snowden, right? So they're going to have a lot of different reasons, but for the purposes of the test, let's just primarily focus on the revenge, monetary, and unintentional. Competitors. So a competitor is going to be an external threat and they're going to have a relatively high level of sophistication and funding. Um, Rivals commonly perform industrial espionage on one another in order to get a competitive advantage on their rival. So this is technically going to be a monetary motivation here, right? Because they want to beat their rival organization. Open source intelligence. So you may see this on your quiz as OSINT. One quick note here, once again, if I haven't said this before, if there's a possibility of them being able to use an acronym on the quiz, they will use an acronym. So we need to get these acronyms down. All right, so OSINT, open source intelligence, is information that is legally collected from publicly available means. Some of these sources can include traditional media like newspapers, television, the radio, social networking, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, um, public information. So, public information would be things like legal documents, government reports, um, professional and academic communications could be some of it. So, like, there's something called, if for those of you who had to read any of these in college, we have academic journals, right? And professional journals. And so they might contain information in there on, an organization structure or some sort of means to achieving um, hacking capabilities or something like that, right? Um, Geospatial content. So this meaning maps or environmental data, and then we have deep web. So deep web is not the same as dark web. Dark web is pretty much um, a it is the internet, but not it's not easily connected to. You have to use something like a Tor or some sort of onion browser, Tails. Um, this is um, you can't access the dark web through a regular internet browser. However, deep web you can. The problem is with deep web, this is information that is not indexed by a traditional search engine's web crawler, and so this would be things like you know uh, emails, web-based emails, like your own personal emails. It's not on the internet for anybody to see. This is the stuff that we have at MC that's not indexed by a web crawler, right? So maybe stuff on my MC, right? That's what we're talking about here. Stuff on your bank account, right? That's hosted online, but it's deep web. It's not dark web, right? The You're not going to find your bank account on Yahoo, hopefully, right? Um, so because we have such a huge amount of data, it's it's really important that we identify relevant information and accurate information. Um, so it's practiced in public and private sectors, right? So meaning Coca-Cola is going to do it, and the CIA is going to do it, and the DoD is going to do it. So and Montgomery College is going to do it. It is practiced in public and private sectors. All right, so our first activity of chapter 3, um, identifying any types of attackers. So, like any other business, DevelopTech is the target of attacks, right? So, before we assess specific attacks, we need to assess the attackers themselves. Understanding attackers' goals, skills, and origins will help us more readily anticipate and mitigate these threats. So, we have a quick quiz and short essay answer. After we have completed this, please come back and finish the slides. Social engineering. So, social engineering um, is an activity where the goal is to use deception and trickery to convince unsuspecting users to provide sensitive data or violate security guidelines. So it's usually going to be a precursor to other types of attacks. And because these attacks um, depend on human factors, right? Um, they can make symptoms hard to identify, right? Um, Social engineering attacks are going to be in a bunch of different ways: emails, phones, etc. Um, so our systems are only as strong as our employees are, right? But the employees here are going to be the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity. So, for instance, attackers basically they're going to take a knowledge of people who aren't technically knowledgeable, who's not thinking about these type of attacks, right? Um, a typical scenario would be something like an attacker creating an executable to gain and store network usernames and passwords, and uses email to send the executable to users, right? And then the email says that it's from IT. It asks you to run the executable to provide the credentials to solve the network issue, right? So you work for, maybe somebody's been conducting surveillance on your organization or you, and they know that you work for whatever company, and so they are going to create a false email, maybe create a false website, and then they email you something saying, hey, Mr. John Jacobs, this is a message from the IT team. We want to make sure that all of our users are within our password compliancy. Please click the following link and provide your username and password so that we can make sure that you are in line with our policy, right? Except that policy doesn't exist, or that IT would never send you that message, and then now you've given them your username and password, which they will then use to gain access to your system, basically, right? Um, another another example would be um, an attacker calling the help desk and pretending to be a remote sales rep, right? And they need is help establishing a remote connection. So maybe somebody calls in and says, "Hey, I'm from whatever contracting organization. We're working on their system right now. However, I need to automatically remote into your desktop, right?" And then Cindy from Cindy at the front desk, she doesn't know any better, and so she provides them with the username and password to her workstation, and then they are able to gain access from there, right? Or maybe somebody just sends you an e-card or on through an email, right? Happy birthday to you, John, and except that downloads some sort of backdoor to John's computer so they can gain access. Or maybe happy birthday to you, John, and then there's something on there, some sort of patch um, that's gonna open up a Trojan or something, right? And we'll get into what a Trojan is in a second. So, effectiveness on when it comes to social engineering, this is very successful social engineering, right? And it's successful because we're exploiting people's trust. This is happening all the time. Social engineering was around way before computers, so the same thing as grifters, right? Or maybe a lot of you probably have seen those mail. There's a lot of mail that's social engineering tactics. So my father gets a whole bunch of mail and it's saying that he's won something, and all he has to do is send $500. So it's the Nigerian prince scam that people have always talked about on the internet, except it's um, through regular snail mail, right? And he's fallen for that a couple times because he wants to be a millionaire. Unfortunately, he thinks that people are not out to get him, but they are. So, and how do they do this, right? In his case, they do it through urgency. So, you've won $1,000, but in order, well, not 1,000, but $100,000, and in order to get this quickly, you need to send me $500 and I'll send it to you. All right. So they created a sense of urgency. Um, However, as I said, there are several different ways. So let's go over some of these. How we're gonna how do attackers exploit trust? Right. They'll do it with authority. So a social engineer might pretend to be a manager or an IT administrator, and if they do it believably enough, then the attacker is going to let down their guard, right? I'm calling from IT. I really need to get in here right now. There's been some sort of breach, and I have to make sure your system's on target, right? However, I'm the one actually starting the breach. Right? Intimidation. This is using threatening somebody's job or something. So usually they're going to impersonate a person of authority, and then since they're scared, they're going to comply with whatever demands a social engineer comes up with, right? You're going to lose your job if you don't give me this password right now. I have a meeting at 10 and I need to get in here, right? And it's okay, fine, I'll let you in. Consensus. So this takes advantage of wanting to be in a group, right? People want to be in groups. We're a tribal society. So a lot of times people defer to the wisdom of the group in order to um, make their decisions, right? If they can't make a decision, they'll go with the group by default. So, for instance, maybe the attacker fools users into believing that malicious websites are legitimate by making a whole bunch of fake reviews and testimonials on a site, right? A lot of times, you guys probably shop by on Amazon by what has the most reviews, what has the highest stars, right? And we want to believe that since a whole bunch of other people think that this product is acceptable, then we should place our own trust in this product, right? And so the problem with that is um, there are things called click farms, and so you can pay somebody to give you 10,000 likes on anything, right? So we could be selling you a crappy product on Amazon by doing this, or we can say get a whole bunch of reviews, follow this website, and get your information so you can get a free gift card or something like that. Maybe we post that somewhere on the internet and on Facebook, and then we leave 1,000 messages on the bottom, saying, "Oh, I got my money so quickly," or something like that, right? And then you're gonna go ahead and try to do that yourself. So that is an issue there. If you think about it, on YouTube, most of us, if we're looking up something on YouTube, we're gonna go with the video that has the most likes, right? The most views. You don't want to. How often do you click on the the video that only has 5 views versus the one with 5,000, or how much do you click on the one with 5,000 versus 500,000, right? Even though my video here probably only has like 10 views, but I'm not trying to socially engineer you guys. Um, Scarcity. So scarcity is offering something of rare or perceived value. So social engineers take advantage of this by offering some sort of reward, right? So that $100,000 that they tell you you're gonna get if you just hurry up and send $500 or whatever, that also plays into scarcity, right? They use urgency and scarcity to get that one done. Familiarity. This is the idea of impersonating someone or something that you already have trust in, right? And so if they're able to do that, then they're pretty much on their way to give them whatever they want. So there are lots of things trying to provide you with familiarity to take advantage of you. A lot of times, just a simple typing in a URL. Maybe you're missing a single piece off of that URL, and then so you type in Goggle instead of Google. And so you are familiar with Google. They know you're familiar with Google, but typing in goggle.com and providing your information to get into Gmail or whatever, um, they've stolen your credentials there because you mistakenly put that in there, but you had your trust in Google, right? Or maybe nowadays with all these robocalls, they can actually spoof somebody's number, one of your loved ones or something like that, right? I was watching a video where they had where a guy was showing off robocalls and what the extent of them were. So he was having, um, he was calling the person's cell phone, the guy he was interviewing, um, with that guy's mother's phone number, even though it wasn't her that actually called. He was able to call someone else's phone with their mother's phone number. And so what would that have done? That would have created a sense of familiarity there, right? So maybe if they see a text message from their mother, even though it's not really their mother, telling them that they need, $500 quickly because there's something bad going on, out there in some sort of jam, They're most likely going to do it. And then urgency. So by creating that sense of urgency, either by offering them some sort of reward or telling them something bad is going to happen, we're most likely going to, you know, fail at critically thinking about, is this any sort of phishing, right? Sometimes we may know better, sometimes we may not, but that urgency um, makes us snap to pretty quickly. Snap into action, that is. All right, so impersonation. This is going to be a human-based attack. It's a type of social engineering in which an attacker pretends to be somewhere they're not, typically an average user in distress or a help desk representative. Um, Also, when it comes to impersonation, it's mostly going to be successful, and when we can't successfully, well, when somebody else can't readily identify somebody, right? So if somebody doesn't really know what their boss looks like, it's easier for somebody to successfully impersonate them, right? Um, if you've ever seen Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, it was a true story of a guy that had, successfully impersonated doctors, airplane pilots, all sorts of different things, just from, you know, how much authority he presented himself with, right? Because people aren't likely to question that. As long as you act like you belong, a lot of people are not going to question whether you belong. So that is something to keep in mind here, especially in security, is to always ask questions, um, even though it may seem as though that person is an authority figure. They always may not be. Um, Phishing. This is a big one here. It's a very common type of social engineering. So, in a phishing attack, an attacker is going to send an email that seems to come from some sort of, maybe a bank, maybe any other reputable source, right? And they're going to try to elicit private information from whatever victim they have, right? So maybe we're claiming that, we need your account number, your social security number, your address, and all that in order to verify your account, right? And maybe we're pretending to be Bank of America or something, right? And um, by sitting here claiming we need account verification, we're actually just stealing your account information, right? So in this case, we have an email, and it is trying to say, our records indicate you tried to withdraw $1,000 at an ATM. If you didn't initiate this transaction, somebody's trying to access your account. So click this link to verify your personal information as a security measure, right? But the whole time, this is the security threat, but it's trying to establish your trust by pretending to be responding to a third security threat, right? So, common ways we can try to identify a phishing attempt is um, noticing the misspelling in something, because a lot of times these are thrown together in a haste. A lot of times these may be coming from foreign places where somebody's English may not be completely up to par. Um, and so they may make mistakes, right? And then other ones, it'll be a lot harder to identify. But these are a common way to identify them would be things like misspelling, um, bad grammar, generic greetings, um, and then alluding to some sort of breach. And here we have something offering a link to official bank business. A lot of times, banks no longer give links anymore because of phishing attempts. So that way they can tell their customers, "Hey, we'll never send you a link." So automatically assume that everybody who sends you a link is a phishing attempt, right? All right. So there are several different types of phishing. Um, Number one, we should never provide our personal information to anybody who requests it um, over the phone or on the email. Um, because a lot of the, for the most part, legitimate organizations don't solicit this information from a client. Um, so there are several different phishing types of variations. Um, we have spear phishing. So that's a variant of phishing attacks where the attacker targets a specific individual or organization, right? So in this case, the the attacker has a specific person in mind or organization in mind, and they're going to target their attack there, right? Whaling is a form of spear phishing that targets um, individuals or organizations who are known to be wealthy, right? So we're targeting whales, the big fish, right? Um, Farming is where a request for a website, such as an e-commerce site, is going to be directed to um, a similar looking but fake website in order to get credentials, right? So there are farming credentials. So Facebook.com, right? And then that way they can get, it's going to look just like Facebook, and then they can get a whole bunch of users names and passwords, right? It's just like farming. You plant a lot of seeds, you get a lot of food back. Um, Vishing. So vishing is going to be a human-based attack where the goal is to get financial, personal, confidential information by using the telephone, right, to communicate with the victim. So a lot of times you get those calls over the phone. This is blah blah blah. We're a collection agency, and if you don't give us our money for whatever fake event happened, they're gonna garnish your paycheck or something like that. Me personally, I've gotten a bunch of calls like that. I don't owe anybody anything, but however, this is never gonna work on me because even if I did owe you, I'm not gonna pay you. Um, that's just how it is. If it's the IRS, they're just gonna have to garnish that from my paycheck. I'm sorry. Um, so smishing. Smishing is a variant of phishing that uses SMS messages to try to elicit personal information from targeted individuals. So you may have gotten some sort of message from like Amazon, and it says your order is going to be here at your house in like an hour or something. Please log on here to verify that you're going to be home to drop it off, right? And you click the link, and then you give in your your login and stuff, and now somebody has your Amazon account, right? So hoaxes. This is going to be an email-based, IM-based, web-based social engineering attack. That's going to be intended to trick the user into performing undesired or unnecessary actions. So a lot of times hoaxes are going to depend on the type of experience that the target has with a computer with technology. Um, a lot of these a lot of these may be just benign and stupid. A lot of them um, are to cause disinformation and stuff, right? Um, so it might be virus or hacking threats. So like I've seen this exact message before on Facebook that we see here. It says, please tell all the contacts in your messenger list not to accept Anwar's friendship request. He is a hacker and the system is connected to your Facebook account. And once one of your contacts accept it, you'll be hacked. Make sure all your friends know. Um, and then forward this. I've seen this exact one a few times. Um, Honestly, I don't know whatever purpose these people had in this hoax. Um, but maybe there's a bunch of stuff for like free offers. So a lot of times you see one and it'll say share this message because Bill Gates is giving away, $10,000 to anybody who shares this message. Some of these are really stupid, right? And people still share them. I have no idea why. He's never going to give you $10,000. I've seen once Mark Zuckerberg is going to give $1,000 to everybody. No, he's not. Um, but then also hoaxes. We need to be aware of um, other things. So you see, this knowledge is power is one of the bullets here. So currently, um, many at least several nation states are um, performing a sort of cyber war with each other, and one of the targets here are us as citizens of another nation. And so there have been a lot of attacks aimed at swaying political and personal beliefs across the country. And so and also aimed at causing confusion um and distrust among people. Right? So um there are a lot of memes going around that encourage uh, false information. There are a lot of Facebook groups that are pushing false information and spreading these hoaxes. So that is something that is a serious thing in our time now. Um, trying to uh, trying to create discourse among the masses, right? And that may be um, stirring up, conservative versus liberal beliefs. Um, it could be racial. There are a lot of racial things going on the internet now, but a lot of this was stirred up by by nation states and has been accelerated by ourselves, right? And picking sides and spreading false information, right? So just be aware of that. There's stuff right now like with the coronavirus. Um, I've seen things where people are trying to say, well, you don't have the coronavirus is fake. I've seen things where people are talking about, well, certain racial groups are immune to the coronavirus. Um, I've seen things where they're saying the government has created the coronavirus, and these are things getting spread around, and they are detrimental to society. Um, because it causes massive issues, right? Let's just imagine that people all thought it was a hoax and then spread it around more, or thought that their ethnic group was safe from the virus and spread it around more, right? So we need to be aware of these hoaxes online and don't feed into them. So next up we have physical exploits, right? And these physical exploits are a type of social engineering that allow attackers to gain access to restricted areas or information. And so, common ones are explained in this table. So, shoulder surfing would be the first one here. So the shoulder surfing is an attack where the goal is basically just to look over somebody's shoulder, right? As somebody enters in their information, right? Their password, their PIN. And so this is actually really easy to do now because we all got cellular phones which are able to zoom in, right? And there is now like a Galaxy S20 with a 10 times zoom, and boy, that thing can zoom in. Um, I think they were in Manhattan. I saw somebody, they were on a skyscraper and they zoomed in to a basketball game going on in either Brooklyn or New Jersey. Um, you know, and this had to be miles away, but they were able to get a good zoom in on that. So imagine, somebody can probably sit outside of a um down the street from somebody down and their as they enter their information into an ATM, or maybe they're in a building all the way across the street, on the 20th floor, and they can zoom in on that possibly. So there's something to be aware of. Dumpster diving. Dumpster diving is an attack where the goal is to basically dumpster dive, inspect the contents of the trash can, right? And so it's going to be really effective during stuff like January. because January has last year's passwords from the calendars because a lot of times people write that stuff on the calendar. Um, then we have tailgating. So tailgating is a human-based attack where the attacker enters a secure area by following an employee without their knowledge, right? Or permission. So somebody walks in the door and they just so happen to grab the door before it closes, right? So the only way you're really gonna stop this is by having really strict physical access um, to keep people from getting in. Maybe on top of the door you also have a guard, and they can see somebody who tries to walk in after somebody else. Um, and then we need to educate our users so to be aware that hey, somebody may be following behind you. And then we have piggybacking. So piggybacking, the goal here is to once again gain access to a secure area, but this time we're going to follow somebody with their knowledge, right? Um, so for instance, right, we've all seen all those heist movies, right? And so they all walk in as a cleaning crew or something, and you know the employees actually hold the door for them, and they're able to enter the cash room or the vault area, and then they start doing their thing and drilling through the vault or something like that, right? So that is called piggybacking. So watering hole attacks. Watering hole attack is it's an attack where the attacker is going to target um, a specific group, right? And here we're going to discover we want to discover what websites or groups that group of people frequent, right? And then we inject that website with some sort of malware, and then possibly that person, possibly one person of this group will become infected, and then maybe that can compromise the rest of the group or the network that is affiliated with that target. So maybe if you're logging in from somewhere online to another website, and then the attacker is able to get to you through this watering hole attack and make their way into the rest of the organization. So these watering hole attacks are going to focus on legitimate websites, popular websites. So that's why they're a bit hard to detect. So they're going to target something that people normally go to, right? A lot of times they are targeting high security organizations, government agencies. Um, so the biggest way um, to stop this is basically just user awareness. Uh, there was a massive watering hole attack that affected iOS devices last year. Um, it was actually found by Google. They have a security research team called Project Zero, and they research security vulnerabilities. And they came to find out that there were several websites. Neither Google nor Apple has said who what these websites were. However, they had when an iOS user um, went to that website, they there was something downloaded onto their device, which gave the attacker access to their iCloud keychain. Um, and so that keychain is used to store sensitive information, such as your password, your information about yourself, your iCloud account, information about possibly other banking information. Um, However, when you shut it off, uh, like when you reset the phone, the malicious code would be gone off your phone. However, once they got the keychain in the first place, they would be they already have it. So you would have to like change all of that. So that was fixed in a security update. However, like I said, they haven't told anybody about that, and they have not said how many of us who use iOS devices um, were affected by this, but it's potentially a large amount. So next up, we have the first activity of this chapter, or so, or actually the second activity of this chapter. So we are going to be identifying social engineering attacks. You can receive complaints about hacked Google accounts. This hack occurs when users sign into their profiles. You need to determine the cause. So once this is done, we will move on to the next slide. Malicious code. So malicious code is going to be undesired or unauthorized software that's placed on the target computer to disrupt their operations or to redirect system resources for the attacker's benefit, right? So this is one of the most prevalent threats to computers there is. And as a security professional and even just a user, we probably already have experience dealing with malicious code because pretty much all of us have had viruses before, but we need to be prepared to fight the infections or stop them from being infected in the first place, right? So, um, malware. Malware is same thing, malicious code malware. But this is placed on a target to disrupt operations or to redirect systems, once again, to the person's benefit. They include things such as viruses, um, Trojans, worms, and this way we gain unauthorized access. All right, so a rootkit. A rootkit is code that is a type of malicious code, right? It is code that is intended to take full or partial control of a system at its lowest level. So rootkits are going to try to hide themselves from monitoring or detection, and they're going to modify low-level system files and integrate themselves into the system. So rootkits can be used non-maliciously. This is how we're going to use virtualization, right? Hyper-V, um, VirtualBox, stuff like that, right? However, most rootkit infections are going to install backdoors, malicious rootkits, and try to control the target system, gain control of it. So in here we have the person who's trying to get access granted to the server, administrative access. All right, viruses. So a virus is a piece of malicious code that's going to spread from one computer to another by attaching itself to other files and through a process of self-replication. So basically the self-replication is not going to start until there's some sort of human activity that's going to spread the virus. So maybe we're going to open an infected email attachment, um, or something of that nature, right? So code in a virus executes when that file is open. So maybe we click on an exe or something like that, right? And then so viruses are used to gather data. They're used to corrupt and destroy data, and they're also used for to enable additional attacks, right? And so because of their self-replicating nature, they're really hard to completely remove from a system, and they cost organizations billions of dollars in damage every year. There's different types of virus types. Um, so we have things like uh, we have stuff where viruses can be encrypted. And so when we encrypt them, it makes it hard for us to figure out um, if there's a virus in the first place, right? So an antivirus scanner is going to need to detect the virus indirectly, right? So if it's an encrypted one, they're going to need to decrypt it, right? We also got something called polymorphic malware, and this is pretty much the same as virus encryption. However, the decryption we have an encrypted file and and a decryption module to be that's included with the virus, and then it decrypts itself each time a virus infects a new file. So it makes it difficult for the antivirus once again to infect it, right? Um, for an antivirus to detect it. And then we have something called armored viruses. So armored virus tries to shield itself from antivirus software and security professionals. So to fool antivirus software, the armored virus tries to obscure its location in the system so that any antivirus software believes it resides somewhere else, and then that's going to prevent the antivirus to detect it and remove it, right? Also, armored viruses can have like obfuscated code, so hidden type code, so that it's hard for people to, for security researchers to go ahead and reverse engineer the virus, right? So we can have encrypted viruses and armored viruses and polymorphic viruses. Worms. So, worms are a type of malware that spread from computer to computer without attaching itself to a different file, right? So it like a virus, it replicates across an infected system. However, it doesn't need any human interaction to replicate itself, and it doesn't attach itself to other files or programs. So viruses, they're going to interface with a specific function or something that the user got to click on or something like that, right? Um, but worms are intended to like interrupt a network for the most part, right? Rather than a specific function or application, right? So a worm doesn't have to actually carry any sort of payload. It's just there to spread, and by spreading itself around so much, it can knock down your network, right? And some worms, they do carry payloads, but this payload is usually to turn the computer into a zombie, a remote zombie, meaning um, turning the computer into something that the attacker can use to attack other machines, right? Becomes the attacker's drone. Stuxnet, one in that the Stuxnet worm was used to take down uh, Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities, and that was developed by the U.S. and Israel, as I stated earlier today. Adware. So adware is software that automatically displays or downloads advertisements, unsolicited advertisements, when it's used. Um, they're usually going to pop up on in a browser as a pop up. And there's a lot of times there's a chance it's going to have spyware or other malware. So like maybe spyware that's got a keylogger on it, so that it can send back your passwords and stuff like that. Or maybe they're just tracking you. Maybe they're trying to get into your bank account or something. Or it could just be benign. Um, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily trying to hurt you. They just might be trying to sell you stuff really annoyingly. Um, however, so it doesn't always have to be malicious, but well, malicious in the fact that it's trying to steal from you. Besides your time, it adware can also like slow down productivity because it's an annoyance, but it's also filling up this space on your computer, right? Um, so that's a problem, right? If you don't want this adware, we don't need it running down our performance or our space, hard disk space. Spyware. So spyware is what I was talking about. Could be inside of your adware at times. So spyware is um, installed malware that is intended to track and report the usage of the target system uh, to someone else, the attacker, right? So the data collected can be web browsing history. It could be personal information. It could be bank account information. It could be your username and password. Um, it can be in it can we can infect a computer through different types of tactics, or maybe it's included in legitimate software, right? A lot of times, a legitimate thing, um, maybe some sort of free video game or something like that. It's bundled in with that free game. Trojan horses. A Trojan horse is usually just called a Trojan. It is a type of malware that hides itself on an infected system, and causes damage to a system, or it gives the attacker a way to monitor or control the system, like through a backdoor or something, right? So, um, Trojans don't self-replicate. They don't attach themselves to a new file. However, they're usually hidden inside another package, like a benign package, something that you didn't think was going to be a problem. So maybe you downloaded a game again, or maybe you got some sort of screensaver, and it all works like it was supposed to. However, it actually, on top of that, has a hidden payload of the Trojan, right? Um, this one right here, where it says, tired of a slow computer, download Odysseus 4 for blazing speeds. That was me at 13, with dial up internet, right? Or 12, 10, I don't remember how old I was. But, anyway, I used to download a lot of stuff on the internet, and with dial up internet, things were very, very slow. And there were a lot of, programs online that claim to boost your download speeds. Honestly, they never boosted anything. However, anytime I ran a virus detector, I was chock full of Trojans. And most likely, this was from downloading these download accelerators, just like we see here. So the name Trojan, for those of us who may not already know, it gets its name from, if you've ever heard of the Odyssey, or the story of, yeah, it's the Odyssey, or the story of Troy, right? And the Greeks and Achilles and all that. Um, the Trojan horse. There was a war between Troy and Greece like thousands of years ago, and the way the Greeks were said to have won was to pretend like they left and build a giant horse and leave it outside of the, like a giant horse kind of statue built out of wood. It wasn't a statue, but it was just like a gigantic horse, right? And so the Trojans thought they had won and brought the horse in to their capital city, Troy. And actually, inside of that horse were a bunch of people, a bunch of soldiers who, once the city was done partying and went to sleep for the night, let themselves out of the horse and opened the gates for the rest of the Greeks to come in and take over the city. So a lot of times, that's what a Trojan horse is actually used for. As we said earlier, it is given usually gives the attacker a platform for monitoring or controlling a system, meaning a backdoor, right? And that's what the Greeks did to the Trojans in this case. They sent them this benign looking package, right? And it was used for them to open the door. Same thing here. Keyloggers. So a keylogger is a hardware device or software application that is going to recognize and record every keystroke made by the user. So this so every time you type something in, it's there, right? So a keylogger is going to capture your password or any other sensitive data. It's gonna see what email you wrote to somebody, right? Anything that you type into there. Um, so there's a whole bunch of keyloggers online. They're freely available. There are hardware keyloggers, in which case you have to actually hook that up to in between like a computer and a keyboard. And then there's software keyloggers, and you can download those anywhere online. Basically, their only way to mitigate for the effects of keylogging is to use a keylogger that's going to encrypt the keystrokes um, before they're sent to the computer, right? So there's different types of encryption, keystroke encryption software you can go find, but you're gonna have to do your own research on that because I haven't bothered to get one. So a remote access Trojan. once again, this is going back to what I was talking about. As I said, a lot of times Trojans are used to create a back door, right? And so in this case, this is a specialized Trojan horse that specifically aims to give us control of the target computer, right? And so um, you're going to see this referred to most likely in the test as a RAT, remote access Trojan, right? Basically, a RAT is going to mimic the functionality of any legitimate remote control program, but it's designed specifically for stealth installation and operation, right? So an attacker would hide a rat in a game or any other application that the user goes ahead and runs, and then they'll go ahead and open that back door because we invited the horse in, right? Logic bombs. So a logic bomb is a piece of code that sits dormant on a computer until it's triggered by some sort of specific event. This event could be a specific time and date or something like that, right? So once the code is triggered, the logic bomb detonates and performs whatever action it was performed to do. So um, this would a lot of times include like erasing or corrupting the data on a network, right? So this is somebody that's mad, they got fired, and they set up a logic bomb to delete all the data on the servers 3 months from now, right? So that way, maybe the person doesn't get caught, right? Because they were pissed off and they decided to hurt the company. And so the logic bomb, it says dormant until something is triggered, right? This could be a specific set of locations. So maybe the logic bomb goes off when the new guy comes and replaces you when he first logs on, right? Something like that. Botnets. So a botnet is going to be a set of computers that has been infected by a program called a bot that enables attackers to collectively exploit computers and mount attacks. So basically, a black hat is going to use a botnet to coordinate DOS attacks, right? Denial of service attacks. And they can use it to send spam emails, right? So they have some spam email and they can use a whole bunch of other people to do it, right? Um, so basically, the botnet is um, it's going to infect everybody else's computer, right? So your computer's, I'm going to create a botnet, right? Um, and then I send I send these things out. Um, Botnets. So a botnet is a set of computers that has been infected by a control program called a bot that enables attackers to collectively exploit those computers to mount attacks. So basically, what happens here, the bot master, the attacker, right? They're gonna create some sort of malicious code to infect other computers, right? And so these computers, we're gonna want the attacker's gonna want to infect a lot of computers, right? And so once they've infected the computer, these computers become drones. Like, so say your computer may be a drone and you're unaware of this right now. Actually, it's a very real possibility. That's not just a example. So we have something called drones and zombies, right? Same thing. Um, they're infected with a bot, and then so the bot master can then call on your computer, your neighbor's computer, my computer, everybody else's computer that he's already infected. He can coordinate attacks using all of us together to make his attacks more powerful, right? So he could use his botnet to send a whole bunch of spam emails, right? Because there's 1,000 of us, and so he can spam, whoever he wants, uh, a whole bunch of times, right? Or maybe we're using all these bots to steal our personal information. Maybe that's what the attacker is doing, right? To getting everything off his drones and his zombies, getting all the user information off of there. Or maybe he uses it to coordinate a denial of service attack on somebody, right? So in this case, he tries to get signed up. He uses a whole bunch of computers to attack. I don't know, some website, PlayStation Network, right? PlayStation Network. That's happened to them a bunch of times. Um, they've been hit by DOS and DDoS attacks a couple of years ago, like all the time. So that would cause PlayStation Network to shut down, and in turn, that would cause PlayStation to lose money, right? Because nobody can get on PlayStation Online and buy stuff or play other people, things like that, right? And so this activity may not be detected by the user, may not be detected by you or me, right? Uh, they start using it when we're asleep or something like that. And so here is our an example. So here's the bot master. They have some servers set up so they can command and control all these at the same time. So here's everybody that's infected, and here's PlayStation Network. So he tells them to all flood PlayStation Network at the same time. And then so PlayStation Network goes down because it cannot handle um, all of these requests at one time. And that would be called a denial of service or distributed denial of service attack. All right, so ransomware. Ransomware is pretty popular right about now. It's a type of malware in which um, it infects a victim's computer with um, with code that is going to restrict the victim's access to the data on it, right? So the software enables an attacker to take control of the user's data in demand for payment for control for return of control, um, and that's called ransomware. Um, we have then it talks about Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is often used with ransomware or crypto malware. Crypto malware is a form of ransomware that uses encryption to render the data inaccessible. So that's what we usually see for ransomware. It's with crypto malware in which, okay, we've taken control over the user system or data, and in this case, we're going to encrypt the well, not we, or maybe you are. I don't know what you're going to do. Or the attacker, right? They're going to encrypt the data that they've taken control over, and now they can no longer access that data, right? So maybe they encrypt all your documents, files, and you work for a company where you have tons and tons of sales data on there. Well, you need that stuff unencrypted, and so what they do is ransom it to you, and usually they're asking for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It's a decentralized encrypted electronic payment system that is used by legitimate entities and threat actors alike. So it's become very popular in recent years. It started off very cheap, a couple cents a piece of Bitcoin. Now it's several $1,000s a Bitcoin. And so several major cities have actually been ransomed. The city of Baltimore, they were had their files encrypted by crypto malware. Um, as we see here, the attacker establishes demands for reestablishing data. So they asked for Bitcoin and several thousand, maybe hundreds of $1,000s of Bitcoin. The city of Baltimore refused to, and they lost all their files. Um, it just happened to New Orleans as well. I'm not sure if New Orleans actually paid. Um, from my understanding, people do tend to pay more than that. There are their entire organization. So they might target an organization rather more so than individuals um, in order to uh, do the most damage to get the most money. And so I've heard that many people actually pay the ransom. They'll just get a third party to pay it for them, so that way they don't look like they've been given into terroristic type elements. Um, WannaCry was used in a lot of these. So WannaCry was I don't know if you've heard of this, but previously, but WannaCry was really big a couple of years ago. Um, it was actually developed by the NSA, and so the 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 code behind it was created by the NSA, and they claim it was stolen from them, that it was hacked from them. Me personally, I don't believe that. I don't see no many people being able to crack the NSA. More than likely, to me, it was one of their workers who leaked it. Right? It continues to be a major threat. My sister actually got hit with that one. Um, in her case, she ended up getting it through a pop up saying that her computer had an infection, and um, click here, and then it encrypted her files. She got that pop up saying to say sell Bitcoin or something, and that they could call some number, right? And so she called that number, um, and they tried to exploit her through there. And she called me, and I told her just factory reset the computer. Don't pay anything. It's not worth it. But somebody like Baltimore, maybe they should have paid for that. Uh, so this is WannaCry. This is the pop-up you would have received if you had it. It says, "Oops, your files have been encrypted." It gives a time that uh, how long you have to pay, or how much you're going to pay before your payment is going to be raised, right? Because it says your important files have been encrypted. You can recover your files, um, but you have 3 days to submit a payment, and after that, the price is doubled. So we have the countdown clocker here, and if you don't pay in 7 days, you'll never get your files back. And that they also have free events for people that couldn't pay at all in 6 months, right? So it says, how do I pay? It says they only accept Bitcoin. So Bitcoin at one point was thought to be anonymous. It's really not. Uh, as a matter of fact, it's really got its start. It like became most useful for people on the dark web. Um, it was big on a site called the Silk Road, where it was like Amazon for drugs and other contraband items and services. And so um, the person who created that was from Maryland, and I believe he's doing a life sentence now. But that site ran on lot on Bitcoin and helped to get Bitcoin um, as legitimate as a source of money where it is today, if that makes sense to you. Um, all right, so advanced persistent threats. So this will also be known as an APT. Right. So an advanced persistent threat is going to use multiple attack vectors to gain unauthorized access to sensitive resources and then maintain that access for a long period of time. So um, these are long range, repeated threats that are included in malware. They target private organizations. They could private target nation states, right? They're targeting the big fish, right? And so one integral defining characteristic of an APT is that it's designed to cover its own tracks, right? So they can stay protected over a long, long time, and that's why it's persistent, and it's advanced because you know who it targets. Next up, identifying types of malware. You will need to test the resiliency of your organization's computers to malware. You need to determine the types of malware that may infect your systems, and you need to be able to respond. I mean, you will be able to respond quicker if you understand the nature of the malware. So we will take a few minutes to do that and then continue on with our slides. All right. So now that we've learned again about attacks against the human part of information systems, um, we can look at the stuff that's going to be aimed directly at the software parts of the system, right? So we'll identify types of attacks that target our operating systems and other softwares. Um, Software attacks can pretty much cripple a company's operations. So we need to be able to prevent that. A software attack itself is can be defined by CompTIA as any attack that targets software resources, operating systems, applications, services, protocols, and files. So the goal here is for a software attack to disrupt or disable the software running on the target system. So the attacker is going to try to exploit the target system to gain access to the target system, to other systems, or to a network. Um, Many attacks are going to be designed to gain control of a computer so that it can be used in the future, right? It gains secret control of a computer, so it's going to be used in the future, and this will be for profit or whatever malicious activity they are trying to get with. So in this case, attack could be against an application, right? Because that's software, operating systems, once again, software, or just files. All of these are software. Um, so password attacks. A password attack is an attack where the attacker tries to gain unauthorized access to and use of passwords. The attacker can try to guess the password. They can try to steal the password. They can try to crack a password. And so password attacks can be found in audit logs, though, um, because people will repeatedly fail to log on, and then they might get a success, right? So that may hip you to the fact that somebody is trying to crack a password. And then successful logons at unusual times could be another indicator, right? Because hey, Betty does not work at 3 a.m. Her job is from 9 to 5, and she shouldn't be in the system at such and such a time, right? She's no way she's working from home, so that may indicate that you need to do a little bit more of investigation. All right, so there are several different types of password attacks. Um, there's guessing, right? So the guessing is going to be individual repeated attempts to guess a password. These are going to use different type of values that are common for people to use as passwords. So maybe it'll be the user's name, maybe it will be a spouse's name or some significant date that somebody has. So a way to combat against this is have a feature that'll lock people out after a specified amount of incorrect password attempts. Um, Passwords can also be stolen. It could be through sniffing the network communication, meaning somebody sitting in the middle of a network communication and seeing what's been said. Um, Reading handwritten notes, people write down passwords. Or maybe, they did some shoulder surfing and saw somebody enter the password in one day. When it comes to dictionary attacks, this is going to be automated password guessing, right? Because we can in this case the password is going to be compared against a list of possible password values, um, and it's going to meaning a lot of times dictionary words, right? So that's why they tell you don't use dictionary words in creating your passwords anymore, because what people will do is they will compile the entire dictionary, and then on top of that they will have the entire dictionary plus appending numerals to it. So password one, right? And that's the appended numerals. And then also letter substitution. So instead of the word password, maybe it's maybe somebody tries to type it in PA55W0RD. Okay, well, yes, that is in somebody's dictionary as well, right? So what it does is they'll take a list of passwords and try to use that dictionary attack to figure out what somebody's password is. And then we got brute force. So brute force is using some sort of password cracking software to attempt every single password combination there is. However, this is going to take a long, long time because um, we don't have enough computing resources to do this. So really, this is only good for short passwords. However, they have successfully cracked longer passwords by hooking a bunch of computers together, clustering them um, to crack a longer password. So that way they'll have more processing power, right? And then we have brute force attack. Oh, sorry, we've already talked about that one. All right, so a rainbow table attack. Um, a lot of times this is used in conjunction basically with a dictionary, like the dictionary based attack. But instead of a dictionary attack is going to try all the possible combinations in the dictionary. Well, a password, a rainbow table attack generates all the hashes for something in a dictionary, right? So hashes always equal the same thing depending on what hashing algorithm you're using. So the output of password on an MD5 is always going to equal the same output of password no matter how many times you do it, right? So what people would do is use MD5 on everything in their dictionary list with uh, um, all the appendings, and they will use that to try to match hashes to crack a password, right? So they generate the hashes in advance, and that way they can cut down on the processing power needed to do this. Um, and so in this case, the best way to defend against that is through something called salting, but also using really long um, passwords because it's uh, pretty hard for them to keep on trying all these commonly. You're not going to generate rainbow tables on some strange phrase, right? So happy fat boy 25, right? This people probably hasn't created a rainbow attack for that, or even longer ones. Um, then we have a hybrid password attack. So this is going to use different attack methods when trying to crack a password. So they'll include a dictionary attack, a rainbow table attack, and a brute force attack all at the same time trying to crack this. And then we have our birthday attack. So a birthday attack is going to try to exploit weaknesses in mathematical algorithms in order to generate a hash. So this type of attack is gonna take advantage of the possibility that different inputs are going to produce the same encrypted output. So, I mean, I don't know how common this actually is. I've never seen an example of a real life one taking place. However, it's named after the fact that um, there's a 50 in any group of 23 people. There's a 50% chance that two people have the same birthday, and that's a mathematical fact. And so we're just playing with chance here. Cryptographic attacks. So a cryptographic attack is a software attack that's going to exploit weaknesses in a cryptographic system, such as the code, the ciphers, the protocol, and the key management systems. So it's primarily used to decipher encrypted passwords. Um, we're going to have something called a known plaintext attack. So in a known plaintext attack, you'll see that as a KPA. The attacker is going to try to gain access to plaintext messages and its corresponding ciphertext to determine the correlation between the two of them, right? So we know exactly what the ciphertext is going to be, and we know exactly what the plaintext is going to be. And so by looking at both of these, we're going to try to figure out um, what the algorithm actually is, right? We're going to try to figure out the correlation between them so we can crack other things. Um, so then we have a chosen plain text attack. So in a chosen plain text attack, the attacker encrypts a selected plain text message and then tries to analyze the resulting ciphertext. So um, he'll select America's favorite or something like that. I'm looking at my Wendy's cup, but it says America's favorite, and so he'll encrypt America's favorite and then try to find the correlation between that ciphertext and and the chosen plain text, right? And then we have a ciphertext only attack, and then so in this case, in the ciphertext only attack, the attacker is going to access the ciphertext and use frequency analysis to break the cipher. So there are certain words or letters in the English language that occur more often than others. So maybe like E is the highest one, I believe. And so if there is X in your cipher, the more so letters X in your cipher rather than anything else, then there's a possibility that X is actually equal to E, right? So you would mathematically look at the frequency of each letter in the English alphabet and try to correlate that with the what you find in your ciphertext and then try to break it that way. Then we have ciphertext um, chosen ciphertext attacks. In a chosen ciphertext attack, the attacker analyzes a selected ciphertext message and tries to find the matching plain text. So when attack is repeated, um, there we are going to alter the selected ciphertext based on our earlier attack and try to find a correlation again for each one, right? Until we figured out the whole cipher. So this is called that is a chosen ciphertext attack. So the Allies in World War II used something like this. There was an attack, I mean, an encryption, and in each time the encryption started off, it had a started off the ciphertext the same way, and so they were able to look at that ciphertext, that piece of the message, and find out that it said, "Tell my wife, whatever her name was, that I love her." Right, and so once they were able to crack that part, that sentence, they applied it to each other part of the encryption, the rest of the message, and we're able to break the encryption that way. So same thing here. Um, then we have a downgrade attack. So in a downgrade attack, the attacker is going to exploit the need for backwards compatibility and force the system to abandon the use of encrypted messages in favor of plain text messages. So we have like, tons of different types of Windows, right? 10, X, P8, 7, 95. So all of these Windows versions, a lot of times they're backwards compatible. So in this case, we may try to force another computer to downgrade to a Windows 95 protocol or something, to Windows 98, when to a point where there was no encryption on a communication, or to the point where the encryption on the communication was weak and can be now defeated, right? Um, we have replay attacks. So this is where an attacker intercepts session keys or authentication traffic and then use them later to authenticate again. Right. So sometimes people will steal your session keys online. So a session key is when you go ahead and log on to Amazon.com um, and you're logged in. And then you press the X button to shut down your browser, but you never logged out. And then when you get back on, you're still logged on again, right? When you pull your browser back up, that is because there's a session running, right? And so if an attacker can steal your session keys, which is usually stored in cookies, the attacker can then present your session keys to Amazon.com instead of trying to find out what your password is, right? And then so if they present your keys to Amazon.com, they are now logged in as you, even though they did not know your username and password, right? And then finally, we have weak implementation attacks. So this is going to focus on how the cryptographic system is implemented. So other attacks are going to focus on the algorithm used to encrypt the data. Well, in this case, it's going to focus on weak um, encryptions and things of that nature. Backdoor attacks. So a backdoor is a type of software where the attacker creates a software mechanism called a backdoor, right? The backdoor, it can be a software utility or a bogus user account, either one. Uh, Typically, it's going to be delivered through a Trojan horse. Backdoor software typically is going to listen for commands from the attacker on the open port. Right, so it's waiting for a Trojan horse has been installed, and then it listens for signs from the attacker to come through on an open port, and then the attacker can send commands to disrupt that target computer. Right, and so backdoor access is not always detected, and because of that, it can be persistent. Right, and a lot of times they do not leave any evidence behind. Um, some software actually ships with backdoors in them, so they can support maintenance, troubleshooting, um, and they're actually just going to have to rely on attackers not discovering these. This is the reason why Apple does not want to create a backdoor. If you're not familiar with this, several times now, the United States government has asked Apple to crack um, locked iPhones, to which they have supposedly refused to do so. They've also asked that Apple Apple create a backdoor for them and other companies as well, for policing purposes. However, these organizations have declined to do so, because once they create a backdoor, it's gonna get leaked, and so they make everything susceptible to be exploited in that case. A takeover attack is going to be preceded by a backdoor attack, right? So a backdoor attack is the first step in a takeover attack, and that's when the attacker takes full control and remote access of another computer, right? So um, there are other steps that they can use for a system takeover, but Trojans are usually the first step. So in this case, we have a attacker. They send this server a Trojan horse, and they create a backdoor account in order for this attacker to access this server. Application attacks. So application attacks are software attacks that are going to target a web-based or client-side application. They threaten web servers, they threaten users, they threaten back-end systems, software, um, and they often lead to authentication breaches, um, along with customer impersonation, false information, all sorts of different things. Source code, um, source code is software instructions that are written in a human readable program language. Um, and that's compiled into machine code executed by the computer. Um, when source code has been disclosed or tampered with, it can further network breaches. And then once that's done, we can help to start an application based attack. So basically, it is what runs applications. Source code is applications are created with source code. So there are different types of application attacks. Um, there are client side attacks, and so client side attacks are um, application attacks that have exploited the trust between the user and the client. Web application attacks are going to be an attack that focuses on the applications that actually run in browsers, right? Types of application attacks. There's something called cross-site scripting. So this is a web application attack that's going to be directed towards dynamic content that changes, right? And this is done by introducing malicious scripts onto a trusted website. And so, since that website is trusted, the victim's browser grants the script the same permissions as the rest of the site. And so, malicious code is then able to run. So cross-site scripting attacks are similar to watering hole attacks in that when somebody goes to this website, they are then the malicious code then runs, right? Uh, the person that had the most the person that had the most friends on MySpace used to let you if you remember MySpace anyway, MySpace used to let you put code onto your page, and so the person that had the most friends on MySpace actually had written in some JavaScript, and um, that JavaScript was meant to anytime a person went to this person's site, it added them as a friend and anybody in their friends list as a friend. So he was the most popular person on MySpace at that time by introducing cross-site scripting. Um, then we have XSRF, which stands for, sometimes you may see it as CSRF. So that is a cross-site request forgery attack. This is a website application attack that's going to take advantage of the trust between a user, an authorized user, and the website itself. So in this case, this type of attack is going to exploit the web browser's trust in unexpired browser cookies, meaning our session that we started, right? So websites at risk are going to be the ones that perform functions that are based on authentication users automatically um, signing back in with the static browser cookie that's on their machine, right? So the attacker tries to steal that cookie data and gain access to the website that way, like I was talking about earlier. Um, then we have command line injection attacks. So there's SQL injection. So that is SQL is structured query language, and so that's the language used by databases, and so like stuff like your passwords and stuff are stored in databases. So in this case, the attacker is going to use a query that exploits and reads the data in the database, and they can use it to modify a database. Maybe they delete the entire database or something, or maybe they just steal everybody's credentials, right? It's sticking in code, SQL code, and receiving information back. So somebody might stick an SQL code into um, a form that requests a username and password, and instead they put in SQL code and it logs them in as maybe the first person in that database. Then we have an LDAP injection attack. So an LDAP injection is one that targets web-based applications, and it fabricates LDAP statements that are created from user input, right? So a system that will be vulnerable to this when it fails to filter out input properly. So LDAP is lightweight directory access protocol, and so this is just exploiting code that would have been used to access directories on network directories. Then we have directory XML. So XML injection is an attack that's going to use XML query data. XML is extensible markup language. It's kind of like HTML. The attacker is going to gain access to the XML data structure in this case and input in malicious code that is then read on the server and maybe messes things up or something like that. Um, then we have directory traversals. So directory traversal is an attack basically that allows access to files and directories that um, may not have been intended for a user to be able to access, right? So it's something that affects HTTP based interface, but mostly like the URL, um, the spot on your browser where you stick in a URL. So every time when we're online, it's like www.yahoo/news slash whatever news story, right? So maybe you change it, instead of saying news, you say users or something like that, right? Passwords, and then you're able to get into a password page or a users page or something of that nature. You're basically exploiting the directory that's built into the website itself, but maybe the person that coded the website didn't expect you to get into the image folder, right? They have images in the image folder somewhere that they link within their website. However, they don't link the entire image folder, and you're able to see a bunch of stuff unintended for you, right? Um, Let me have a 0-day exploit. So this is an attack that occurs immediately after a vulnerability is identified, and that's when the protection is at its lowest. However, it doesn't even mean that. A lot of times, with 0-day exploits are exploited before they even found the vulnerability. Like the creator may not have known about this vulnerability, right? So these are going to be difficult for to detect because the creator doesn't even know that this actually exists, right? Um, then we had this that the exploit actually exists, that they had a problem there. Then we have overflows. So a buffer overflow is going to get data to go past the boundary of the destination buffer and corrupt adjacent memory. This is going to cause the app to crash or reboot or maybe even execute rogue um, code. So basically, when we create a web application, there are languages such as C in which you have to um, state how much memory is going to be in any particular um, variable, and so a buffer overflow is designed to put in data that is more than the intended data. And so when it sends data that's too large for that intended uh, data space, then it can help cause the application to crash. Driver manipulation. So driver manipulation is going to be a software attack where the attacker is going to rewrite or replace legitimate device driver, or an application programming interface (API) to enable malicious activity to be performed. So in this case, the attack is going to use the practices of shimming and refactoring to provide attackers with unauthorized access to hardware and software, right? And so shimming is the process of developing and implementing code that goes between the application and the operating system to enable functionality that wouldn't be available, right? So um, there's a shim, right, that allows compatibility with older legacy Windows versions, right? Because remember earlier I was talking about you can have backwards compatibility between a Windows 10 and a Windows 95 machine, and so it uses additional code to shim to create backwards compatibility. Another explanation for this would be like, okay, you can download you can download what are called emulators, and this is additional code that's going to allow someone to emulate the hardware of a Super Nintendo or a PlayStation on a computer. This functionality wouldn't be available without that additional code between the operating system and the application itself. Um, then we have refactoring. So refactoring is just the process of restructuring application code, and it you can improve its design or whatever the case is, right? Um, you can improve the code without affecting like the entirety of the application, or you can do it to um, get it to handle different situations. Ones that it's just improvement on the code. However, in an attacker, they can gain access to source code and then maybe worsen the design or create bugs or security vulnerabilities by refactoring code that already worked, right? privilege escalation. So privilege escalation is going to be the practice of exploiting flaws in an organization, in an operating system or application to gain a greater level of access that was originally um, intended for the user or the application itself. So we have two different main types of privilege escalation. Uh, the first one is vertical escalation, meaning elevation. In a vertical escalation, a user or application is able to access functionality and data that shouldn't be available to them. So, like maybe a user only had read access to something, but not write access or editing or deletion access, right? So now they have more privileges than they should have had. And then we have horizontal escalation. So this is where somebody um, gets the user access and functionality that was actually intended for another user. So maybe one user can access another user's bank account, right? But they're still on the same level. Um, we're both at the level where we can access our bank accounts, right? But we're not at the level where we can add money to the bank account, that or change the contents of our checking account, right? We're not at that as that's not vertical escalation. I had you. This is just giving somebody access um, to another person's functionality. So in this case, we have a group, and they only had ACL, so access control list, said that they only had read only capabilities. But if you escalate them, now they have read, write, and delete capabilities. And the next activity will be identifying password attacks. So attackers have compromised some of DevelopTech's employees' credentials, and employees have been using common dictionary words for their passwords. And we're going to use Cain and Abel to identify weaknesses in our employee passwords. TCP/IP. TCP/IP is a standard network protocol that is in use worldwide, right? So the network is the backbone of today's business, right? And then because the network connects to the internet, right? And so most businesses are going to rely on network for everything, right? And this is how we stay connected with each other at work and in our daily interactions with other people. But we have to keep this information secure. So in this case, we're going to get a little bit of awareness about the basics of TCP/IP. So TCP/IP is the standard protocol that is used today for the internet. It's a layered suite of multiple protocols. There are a bunch of different protocols within TCP/IP, um, and it enables the communication between hosts. So typically, what happens when we create a connection in any TCP connection, actually, there is something called a three-way handshake, and this must be completed with each packet that's sent. So a host, meaning your computer, will send a synchronization packet to a server. The server responds with a synchronization acknowledgement packet, and then the client then serves back to the server an acknowledgement packet, right? So there are um, several layers to the TCP/IP model. We have an application layer, a transport layer, an internet layer, and a network interface slash data link layer. All right. So the network interface layer is going to enable network software to transmit data on the physical network via um, adapter or network cards, right? The major protocols on here are just going to be Ethernet and wireless specifications like 802.3 and 802.11. So 802.3 is a protocol for Ethernet, and 802.11 is for wireless, right? And then when it comes to internet, layer. That's going to include addressing, naming, and routing. So each one of us has an IP address. So whatever it is, 197.32.24, whatever. So IP, the internet layer, internet protocol is within the internet layer. So this manages the numeric hosts across the internet. And so here we're going to say that, okay, Google is 8.8.8.8. So that is Google's IP number, right? Um, and so we also in here is something called DHCP. And so that's how we get these IP numbers at home, right? So whenever you connect to a to your router at home, um, it is given an IP number by something called DHCP, right? That just passes out these IPs. And then also there's something called an Internet Control Message Protocol. This is how we kind of connect test for communications between two different devices or servers. And so it sends something called a ping, which we're going to get into later to establish, hey, we do have a connection. When it comes to the transport layer, this is going to provide a communications between services. So there are two different types here. We have TCP, not to be confused with the TCP IP model, but just TCP, which is the Transmission Control Protocol. And so this sends packets, right? But it waits for acknowledgments when packets go through. So remember, we have to do that three-way handshake, right? Um, so it's connection oriented. It establishes the connection and it guarantees delivery by by getting that acknowledgement whenever possible, right? And so TCP will also count packets and make sure that each packet is sent. If the packet fails to go through, it will send it again and again and again, right? And each time a packet goes through, it has to make that connection, that three-way handshake, right? And then we have another protocol within transport layer called UDP. So UDP is connectionless, meaning it doesn't actually care that you receive every single packet, right? It ensures the constant transmission of data packets, which are called datagrams, right? So we don't have packets in this. We call these data packets datagrams. And so instead of doing the three-way handshake and checking for errors, um, we don't do that because that's going to cause a delay or take longer in processing and stuff like that. So UDP is going to be used for streaming movies and things like that because you don't want to sit here and get an acknowledgement for every single movie packet, or you don't want it to go back and go find that piece that it missed, right? Because then your movie will be kind of skipping back and forth. And it's also used for phones, right? Because whenever your phone's breaking up, that's because it's dropped one of these UDP packets, right? One of these datagrams. It doesn't care that you didn't get it. It just keeps on going because it can't just go back and give you a piece of that phone call that already passed, right? That wouldn't make sense. It would really screw things up. If somebody tried to call you and say, "Hello, how are you?" And I'm doing fine, and then it comes in as "I am doing fine, hello," that would be weird. Or "I am doing fine, uh, are you?" Right? That wouldn't really work, right? So we're gonna bypass resending those packets in this case. After TCP and UDP is the application layer. So this is gonna provide us utilities that enables our client applications on a system to access networking, right? So here we'll find file transfer protocol. So that's how we download things, right? And enables the transfer of files between a user and the host. Um, so that's downloading. HTTP, so that enables us to transfer web content. So that's how we are getting on the internet and doing web browsing, right? Um, we have SMTP. So that's how we exchange emails. We have SSH. That's going to be how we make a secure connection to another um, host. So there are a lot of different protocols in use in all of these, right? And so we try to um, in this test, you're gonna get questions that are gonna apply to each one of these. So it might say, um, what protocols are you going to find on the application layer? Or this application layer protocol enables this, and you have to pick out the correct protocol that they're talking about. Right? Spoofing attacks. Spoofing attacks are a network-based attack where the goal is to pretend to be somebody else for the purpose of identity concealment. So in this case, it is the computer equivalent of impersonation. Now, there are four common methods of spoofing. We have IP address spoofing, MAC address spoofing, ARP poisoning, also or spoofing, or in DNS poisoning / spoofing. Um, IP and MAC address spoofing. So, IP address spoofing is a spoofing attack where the attacker sends IP packets from a spoofed source address, spoofed meaning fake, right, to communicate with targets. And so the intent in this case could be trying to get sensitive information to, so that way the victim in this case doesn't know who the attacker actually is, right? Or maybe they're going to try to bypass some sort of authentication based on our IP address. So like people do this with um, like streaming media. So Netflix, for instance, if you get a certain type of Netflix, if you are in the USA, right? But the Netflix that's in France or Japan is different. So people will spoof their IP address to get access to different content, right? Um, or maybe they'll use the IP address to maybe to log on to the website that they're not supposed to. Like if they had cracked another user's password and username for a company, but this company only allows them to log in from a certain location. Well, they can spoof that IP address to be at that location. So in this case, we have an IP address of 206.49, which is spoofed to 206.149, right? And then the spoofed packets are here, and they get sent out um, to the server and gets returned back to this spoofed address, which ends up going to us. So then we have MAC address spoofing. So MAC address spoofing is a spoofing attack where the attacker reconfigures a network interface to disguise the original MAC address, right? And so a MAC address, each network device in the world has its own unique MAC address. And so in this case, we are trying to conceal that unique MAC address and trick um, an OS into thinking that it has a different MAC address, right? And so that way, this MAC address, the original MAC address, um, says that it has this MAC address, and then it sends out data for the server, and the server ends up responding to the spoofed MAC address, right? Then we have ARP poisoning. So ARP poisoning is an address resolution protocol in which the mechanism by which individual MAC addresses are matched to an IP address on a network. So we're gonna have like um, let's say we have a table, and we're gonna have a table full of IP addresses, and then here on the left, so on the left hand side, we got our IP addresses, or right here in this picture, we have the IP address, so 192.168.1.100, and that is associated with this MAC address, right? So in an ARP poisoning attack, it's gonna redirect. Um, it's gonna redirect because it thinks that it has a different uh, MAC address than it does, right? Or so in this case, we have the attacker, right? And this attacker, we have this attacker, and we have these two hosts. So this host is trying to send a message to this computer, right? 192.168.100 is trying to send a message to 192.168.200, as we can see right here, right? And then host B is trying to send a message to host A, as we can see through this IP here. However, as you can see, the MAC addresses associated with these, right? So host B's IP address ends in 200 and its MAC address starts with B. However, this message to that IP address starts with C3, which is the attacker's IP address. And this MAC address um, for host A starts with A1. However, the message that host B is trying to send to host A, even though it has .100 as the IP, that IP is matched out to this MAC address as well. So in this case, the attacker has altered the ARP table um, and set these IP addresses as his location, right, at C3. Um, so an attacker could, at this point, choose to capture the traffic or alter the traffic before forwarding it to its correct destination. So it could alter the message it's trying to send here before it goes to B, or it can send this information to the middle of nowhere, right? And that way we can create a denial of service, right? So instead of the attacker sitting here, it might point to nothing. DNS poisoning. So a DNS poisoning is similar to an ARP poisoning, right? A network-based attack where an attacker exploits the open nature of DNS to domain name to a different IP address. This is known as DNS spoofing. So um, DNS, we should think of DNS as a phone book, right? A phone book in your contacts list, right, on your phone, you have people's names, right? And those names are associated with a phone number, right? Well, that's how the internet works. Each server has an IP address, right? And when you type in google.com, you're not actually going so much to google.com. Um, it's more so you type in google.com and it goes to a DNS server. So it goes to a DNS phone book and it looks up the Google's phone number, right, in the phone book. And so it'll give you back 8.8.8, and that is Google's real location. So just like in your phone, it says mom. Well, mom is really just pointing to a phone number. And in this case, google.com really just points to a phone number, which is our IP address. So in DNS spoofing, Um, somebody might want to capture data from the domain name visitors. They might want to serve malware to the domain name visitors, or they might want to create a denial of service. So somebody here gains administrative access to the local server, right? So somebody's going to tell us where to find google.com, right? And their number, right? But instead, they've gained access to the server and they've loaded on um, malware that's going to redirect google.com requests to their server, right? And so when somebody asks, where's google.com, then the false uh, phone book, basically, the false DNS entry, will redirect that person to somewhere else, right? So if you're looking for mom, this thing, the DNS poisoning will forward you to, I don't know, a debt collector instead when you every time you press mom, right? Um, but a lot of times they will spoof google.com and send you to a fake page, but that fake page just looks just like google.com, right? And then when you log on to google.com, you are not passing your credentials to Google. You are passing those credentials on to the fake web page, and somebody's collecting that information. So a lot of times, maybe after you've provided them with false credentials, they just simply redirect you back to the real Google after that. That way, you're none the wiser, right? So, There are some legitimate reasons that people might do DNS spoofing. Um, some network hardware has DNS spoofing capabilities in it to allow routers to act as a proxy server, but that's about it. Port scanning attacks. So the logical endpoint of a connection between two hosts is called a port, right? So um, a port has to be open for somebody for it to get accessed, right? So a port scanning attack is a network attack where the potential attacker scans computers and devices on the internet to see which TCP or UDP ports are actually open and listening, right? Um, so when somebody connects to your computer, there's something like 65,000 ports on each computer. And so different services run on these different ports. Um, so usually, like if you're online right now, well, you are online. So your browser is using either port 443 or port 80. So those are HTML. So that's what we're going to be using for the browser. But there are other open ports. So if you close all the ports down, nothing can get through, right? So these port scanning attacks scan to see what ports are open, right? And so they're scanning for an open door, basically, right? This can be automated. We'll do some port scanning in this class, and you're gonna see how it all works. Ports, because port scans are so prevalent, they're likely to occur whether you're aware of it or not. It's just something that's always happening, because attackers are always on the lookout for something new. So here is an example of a port scanning. Um, so in this case, we have uh, the results of the port scan. So port 21, which is FTP, which is how a file transfer protocol, that is open. All right. DNS, which we just talked about, is closed. HTTP is open, so that means internet traffic can come through. POP3, which is mail, closed. NNMTP, that's closed, and HTTPS is open, right? And so the attacker might want to go through one of these three open ports in order to gain access to a system. So port scanning is usually like one of the first things people do for reconnaissance, and combined with footprinting, we somebody can begin their penetration processing, right? So footprinting is going to try to figure out what type of OS is being used and everything, and what what version of it is, and etc. And then they would also look at these ports, and then so they know that this is a Linux machine, and they know that this port is open, so that may help them find a specific vulnerability to that Linux machine through whatever port they're using. So there are a bunch of different port scanning utilities. Um, there's Nmap, which we're going to use in this class. There's Angry IP Scanner, Scan, Super Scan. And a few others, right? And so this way, an attacker can identify a live system and launch further attacks. So there are several different scan types. For the first of these is going to be a stealth scan. So this is the type of port scan that's going to identify um, ports without completing the three-way handshake. So the attacker in this case, just remember we had SYN, SYN, SYNAC, ACK, right? The three-way handshake. Well, in this case, an attacker is going to send a SYN packet to the target, and if the target returns with a SYNAC packet, the attacker can then know that the port is open, right? Um, but instead of sending that ACK packet back, they're going to stop the connection to keep it from completing the connection. And so that way it's less likely to be logged because it didn't complete the three-way handshake. So um, it probably won't be logged by the victim in this case. Um, Then we have a full connect scan. So a full connect scan is gonna complete that three-way handshake, so it's gonna be more likely to be detected. However, it's the easiest way to to do scannings, and it allows for banner grabbing. And banner grabbing is gonna collect information about a host, a network host, by examining welcome screens that are displayed on some hosts. Uh, some banners will contain information like, oh, what this is Windows 98, right? And it's Service Pack 4, and it might even give even more information. So that's why people may want to do a full connect scan. It gives you all that banner grabbing information. It identifies the ports. However, it does complete a three-way handshake. Um, and as I said, banner attack grabbing is collecting information from the welcome screens. So here gets the list, it gets the server pack information, and it completes the three-way handshake. Eavesdropping attacks. So, an eavesdropping attack slash sniffing attack is a network-based attack where an attacker uses special monitoring software to gain access to communications on a network wire or across a network. Um, so um on a wired network, they have to have physical access to tap onto the network cable with a device. But on a wireless network, they just need to be able to receive signals from the wireless network. And this is going to be hard to detect unless we see a computer, um, unless we find an unknown computer when we do some sort of scan on our network. And, and this also could be used for stealing content. It's basically a man in the middle attack. So we are gathering the data as it's coming through the wire. And so like stuff like gathering usernames and passwords will be in there, and then the attacker can go and put those in himself later on. So there are a bunch of utilities that will help with network monitoring. And so some of these are only going to sniff the packet on the computer that it's actually installed on, but other ones are able to scan large networks. So one of these tools are going to be Wireshark, right? Um, and we're going to use that in this class. And then there's something called TCP dump as well. That's something we can use in the command line. Um, but these are definitely prevalent. Man in the middle attack. So a man in the middle attack is a type of eavesdropping. Um, and the attacker in this case is gonna make an independent connection between two of the victims, right? And then this attacker can then relay the information as if they're basically talking to each other, right? So they are going to control the information flow between the two victims. So in this case, um, the attacker can view and steal information that he sees, right? So in the scenario, basically, um, we can have a user original transmission between user A and user B. However, the man in the middle, the attacker intercepts the packets from user A that are destined for user B, modify the packets to include something malicious or fraudulent, and then go ahead and forward that modified packet to user B as the original sender. Man in the browser attacks. So this is another man in the middle attack. So this is another type of eavesdropping, right? So this is going to combine a man in the middle attack with a Trojan horse type of network. Yeah, it's going to modify the victim's web browser um, via extension or scripts, right? So it's gonna embed a Trojan horse into that web browser, and then gather personal information or maybe prompt for the creation of a token or something or a pin, right? And so the user may not notice the difference in their web browser, um, but the attacker can then gather as much information as they like, or maybe redirect funds when they're putting in stuff to the bank or something like that, right? So in this case, we have user, he's trying to talk to the bank. However, the user tried to withdraw $50, right? However, the man in the browser is going to withdraw $5,000 and keep that for himself. Um, Biggest thing here I want to tell you guys is I don't know if you have ever noticed, you all of a sudden have extensions onto your browser, right? Usually they'll be up there by the URL to the right, or maybe underneath the URL. When you've A lot of times these extensions download themselves into into people's browser, and so that's where these middle attacks are likely taking place. I mean, man in the browser attacks. So be aware of anything that attaches itself to your browser. Replay attacks. So a replay attack is a network-based attack where an attacker captures network traffic and stores it for retransmitting at a later time to gain unauthorized access to a specific host or network. Right? Um, this attack is going to be successful when the attacker captures packets that contains usernames. It's going to be or any other authentication data, and it's probably not going to be discovered. Right? So this is where the man in the browser, the person that was listening to your, it doesn't have to be a browser, but this anytime there's a man in the middle, uh, they capture that traffic. They find out how you access the network, and they replay it, be whether it be some sort of session key, whether it be some sort of password. They give it back to the network later on. Maybe you log on at 10 a.m. and this person sitting in the middle of your communication, and they go back and they log in at 1, right? Denial of service attacks. So a denial of service attack is going to be a network type of attack in which the attacker is going to attempt to disrupt or disable systems that provide network services. um, they could go ahead and flood a network with a whole bunch of data that's going to consume all of the available bandwidth on the server, right? And then it's going to crash, right? It could send data. Well, in this case, once it's done that, it's consumed all the available resources. It can exploit programming flaws in operating systems. It can overload an email inbox, right? That way you can't get in your email. And then like maybe your genuine messages get bounced back to their sender, right? And um, a denial of service attack doesn't always have to be a malicious thing, right? Um, maybe you've seen something like get really popular on the internet all of a sudden, and then when you try to click on it, you can't. That's because the system's overloaded. So there could be maybe you all of a sudden become famous or something like that, or your site becomes famous. But your site wasn't created to handle that amount of traffic, so you go down. That that's how we don't. It doesn't always have to be an attack, right? Sometimes we are just don't have the resources to work with so many people trying to connect at the same time. DDoS attacks. So a DDoS attack is a distributed denial of service attack. So it is a network-based attack where the attacker uses multiple computers on disparate networks to launch a denial of service attack from many simultaneous sources. So here, unauthorized software was able to create a bunch of bots and a botnet, right? We talked about those. That's all of you and me's computers, right? They've been attacked, and now they're zombies or drones, right? We're the workhorses for an attacker, right? And so um, this is going to happen because the attacker is going to use all our computers to attack a site, right? Um, and it may not stem from malicious intent. As I said before, maybe there's a whole bunch of interest in this website all of a sudden. So that would be also a distributed knowledge service attack. It's literally called the slash dot effect. So um, the slash dot effect is a temporary surge in the traffic to a website that's gonna cause a site to crash. Hijacking attacks. So hijacking attack is a group of network-based attacks where the attacker gains control of the communications between two systems, often masquerading as one of the entities. So we have several different hijacking attacks. We have something called clickjacking. So this is where the attacker hides links underneath web page elements so that a victim will unintentionally select the hidden links. So if you've ever seen a pop up and it'll have the X button, but you click that X, but it actually just makes something else pop up? Well, that's because that wasn't the correct X. They've hidden something, that link under there, and so maybe the X was a little bit higher up or smaller or whatever the case was. So they tricked you into selecting that hidden link in this case. DNS hijacking is where the attacker sets up a rogue DNS server that responds to legitimate requests of IP addresses in exchange for like malicious or non-existent websites. So we're just trying to mess you up there in this case. Uh, Domain hijacking. So this is where an attacker steals a domain name. Um, this is going to be by altering its registration information and then transferring that domain name to another entity. Sometimes they call this brand jacking. Uh, then we have, I believe, session hijacking. So session hijacking is going to be um, an attack where the attacker exploits a legitimate computer session to obtain unauthorized access to an organization's network, right? Um, one of one way you can exploit this would be stealing the active session cookies that authenticated us to a remote server, and then the attacker then uses that cookie to control the session, and they now have access to whatever you were originally on that website. Other ways they do this, they might use command injection to confuse the client, or using ARP poisoning to do man in the middle. Um, Session hijacking could also be used to execute denial of services on a system or server. Um, or maybe they access sensitive information. Like I said, could be your Amazon account, right? Maybe they have themselves a nice Black Friday. Um, URL hijacking, typo squatting. So, this is where the attacker registers a domain name that closely resembles the name of a legitimate website. And so the goal here is to take advantage of the possibility of the domain name being mistyped into a browser. So you accidentally wrote Goggle, right? Uh, Maybe you wrote Macrosoft, right? So people mistype things all the time, and then so somebody will register a domain as that mistyped word, and then maybe they even make this website look exactly like the real one, and try to steal credentials, try to get you to log in like that. Um, so a lot of companies, in order to cut down on that, register domain names that sound kind of like theirs, right? So Google might have bought Goggle.com. Try mistyping Google a few times and see what you get, but it has to be similarly typed. Amplification attacks. So an amplification attack is a network-based attack where the attacker dramatically increases the bandwidth sent during to a victim during a DDoS attack. Right, so these are going to be used usually with like ICMP, DNS, UDP, and NTP attacks. So there's an amplification factor that comes here that enables a small request to send back a large payload, right? So with ICMP attacks, these are going to be known as Smurf attacks, and this will send a high amount of ICMP packets to the host, to which the host is going to respond back, or try to. It's going to increase. We're going to have a large payload to them, and so that and its intent is to try to overload their server. So it's less prevalent nowadays because a lot of sites like make sure that you can't even ping them to begin with to try to stay away from that. In a DNS application attack, um, the attacker is going to send a DNS query to the victim's IP address to a DNS server, which is going to respond with that spoofed IG. Was going to respond with the spoofed address, right? And so if the attacker requests additional information, it can be up to 179 times larger than the size of a regular DNS packet. And so when you send it a whole bunch of fake queries to different DNS servers, the network is going to get flooded and go down. And then there's UDP amplification. So UDP amplification is gonna they're gonna include the DNS amplification of attacks, but they can also do other services, right? So there's something called a Fraggle attack, which is like a Smurf attack. So instead of using it's gonna use UDP packets rather than ICMP, right? The ping ones to bombard the router's broadcast address. So a lot of times these newer routers, they're not going to forward traffic that's going to have broadcast address. So these attacks are less likely nowadays. But we still need to know about them. Then we have NTP amplification. So that's network time protocol. The network time protocol is a UDP attack, and so if the attacker spoofs an IP address and sends what's called a monlist request to the NTP server, the request is going to be 500 times larger than the initial request. So if we send a whole bunch of bots to the NTP request, uh, that's going to quickly get overloaded with it responding with 500 times larger packets. Past the hash attacks. So we've kind of talked about this when we were talking about sessions. So in this case, the attacker is gonna, but it's not. It's kind of like sessions, stealing sessions, but instead, the attacker is gonna steal the hashed user's credentials and use them as is, so hashed, to authenticate to the same network that the credentials are actually on, right? So by resending hashed credentials, the attacker doesn't have to try to crack the password. So in this case, it's normally directed at Windows-based machines because pass the hash can take advantage of single sign-on, such as NTLM and Kerberos. So single sign-on often stores hash credentials in memory on a disk. However, you need network privileges to access them. So in a typical attack, the attacker might send them a Trojan, and they install that onto the computer, and then there's going to be a hash dumping tool used to collect hashes from that computer, and then the hash passing tools are going to push the hashes back all out to the network to establish a spoof session, right? So it's going to use those, let's say, keys, right? The hash is the key, um, to establish a spoof session later on. So we're using the hashed passwords um, rather than trying to break the password in this case. All right. The next activity for this module is going to be identifying threats to the DNS. So, you recently discovered previously that users were served a spoofed Google page. The spoofed page is loaded when attempting to navigate to google.com. You believe your DNS is compromised, but you need to find out more. Followed The following activity is identifying port scanning threats. So attackers can now gather intelligence to see what to attack and how. You're going to identify how port scans can threaten your security. Rogue access points. So a rogue access point is unauthorized wireless access points on a corporate or private network that's going to allow unauthorized individuals to connect to the network. So wireless networks are everywhere, and we need to protect these wireless networks from vulnerabilities. Um, so most organizations are going to have a wired and wireless network to access while we're in the facility, but because of these wireless access points, these won't be easily detected, right? These rogue ones. So a rogue access point can allow man-in-the-middle attacks and give access to private information. So organizations have to protect themselves from these by hopefully installing like a IDS. So a rogue access point actually has access to this network, right? It's on the corporate network. However, you control this access point, right? So at MC, if you look up in the ceiling, there's a white box that is the access point there. Now, imagine you put that white box there, and you're on the network. You have access to that network, right? That is your access point, and it's connected to the network, but you have the keys to the access point. So there is a similar one, which is called an evil twin, right? So the rogue access point was legitimately on the network, right? It wasn't owned by the network. It wasn't the company that put that access point there. It was the attacker, but it was still actually on the main network, right? An evil twin, on the other hand, is an unauthorized access point that deceives users into believing that they are legitimate network access point, right? Um, so in this case, you can find these on corporate networks, private networks, public Wi-Fi hotspots. Um, and we're going to see this a lot when we are looking at wireless networks by looking at it from a list, right? So when you go to the airport and you're looking for some free Wi-Fi and you find some, that's a lot of times where you can find these at these evil twins, right? So it's gonna often be named to a valid uh, IP address, right? And so, I mean, a valid access point. So instead of McDonald's, maybe this evil twin is named MacDonald's, right? So if we see here, this one's DevTech01, but the evil twin is DevTech0 exclamation point, right? So um, in this case, the user or the client is going to click on here. Usually, maybe this might have a stronger connection or something like that, right? And so they're going to connect to this one rather than that one, and then the attacker is gathering all the information that's passed through, right? So a lot of times, like I said, you're going to see this in areas where there's a lot of people, right? So be careful of that, especially like if it at the airport, because I know a lot of airports like to charge for access to the internet, and then hey, if you see a free one, you're most likely going to click it. Jamming. So, jamming is a situation where radio waves from other devices, benign or malicious, interfere with with wireless signals to communicate over a wireless network. This is referred to as interference. This is usually going to occur because at home because we have a bunch of wireless devices, we have microwaves, um, and microwaves actually operate on a bandwidth that's close to that of the wireless network. I believe that actually they both are running a lot of times on 2.4 gigahertz, and so that can cause interference. Um, And so another thing that could happen though is attackers can purposefully use a radio transceiver to jam or intercept connections, right? Transmissions. You can actually buy these jammers online on Amazon. I do believe it's illegal, so I wouldn't try it. Bluejacking. So bluejacking is a method for attackers to send out unwanted Bluetooth signals from a smartphone, mobile device, tablet, laptop, or other um, Bluetooth-enabled devices. So maybe this could lead to stuff like device malfunctions, right? They're sending you stuff that you didn't ask for. Um, it could send viruses, Trojan horses. So basically, you should be rejecting any anonymous uh, airdrops or stuff like that, right? And put your you should put your device into non-discoverable mode, so that way nobody can just airdrop you something, right? Um, and Bluetooth, we should all know what Bluetooth is. It's a short range wireless radio network transmission, and it's usually to connect two personal devices, such as, in this case, they're saying a mobile phone and wire headset. So you and your AirPods, or maybe you and another person that you're trying to airdrop a photo to, right? Blue snarfing is a wireless attack where the attacker gains access to unauthorized information on a wireless device by using a Bluetooth connection. Right. This is close range because Bluetooth is supposed to be limited to 328 feet. I don't ever get more than 30 feet. But unlike bluejacking, uh, blue snarfing leads to the exploitation of private information. Right. So in bluejacking, people are dropping information to somebody else, maybe malicious code, maybe unsolicited pictures. Um, uh, uh, There was somebody, a friend of mine, he used to airdrop his telephone number to um, people. Um, but Blue Snarfing, they're trying to exploit private information. So in Blue Snarfing, they gain access to your computer and then maybe go steal your email, your contacts, or your pictures and stuff. Then we have near field communication attacks. So NFC is a communication standard for wireless devices in close proximity. Um, It's used for in-person transactions. This is how Apple Pay, Android Pay, and Samsung work, right? You put it towards the point of sale system, and it exchanges information, right? So, it's very close range. You see how closely you have to hold your phone to the point of sale device in order for it to get it to work. So it's about that. So, thing is, an attacker can possibly have an NFC antenna close up, right? And then they're able to eavesdrop uh, from a close range. So maybe they eavesdrop and capture your signal as you're transferring it to the point of sales transaction, right? So, um, other problem with NFC is if you lose it, somebody can possibly go use it themselves, right? Um, but my phone, I mean, I have to put in my password again to do it. So hopefully yours is the same way. Next we have radio frequency identification. So that's RFID. So this technology is going to use electromagnetic tools to automatically identify and track tags or chips affixed to selected objects and stores the information about those objects. So it has a tag and a reader. Um, it's used for inventory management and tracking, human identifier and animal identification. It can be used with smart card, contactless payments, and smart cards. Um, so your dog, some people chip their dogs, right? They put an RFID chip in there, and then it's not currently powered, but when it comes in contact with a reader It sends the signal and gives out that identifiable information in there. So that's how that works. It's not GPS, so if your dog gets lost, it's still lost until the pound checks it to see if there's a RFID on it. Um, One type of attack for RFIDs is actually skimming. Like if you've ever heard where people put a device um, on top of a gas station point of sale system, sometimes they'll add a skimming device. And so some of these RFID readers can kind of skim contactless bank cards, right? So meaning maybe that little wand that some people pass at the gas station, it can get it that way. Or maybe those of us that use the Metro cards, um, they can use fraudulent RFIDs to read signals on those, right? Because that's what your Metro card is using. War driving, war walking, and war chalking. So, war driving and walking is a threat where the attacker searches for wireless LAN networks while in motion. Um, it's using devices such as mobile phones, tablets, and laptops. So, just looking for open systems here, right? Um, and then we have war chalking. War chalking is using symbols to mark up a sidewalk or wall to indicate the presence and status of a nearby network. I've honestly never seen anything like that. I've seen it in a movie, Mr. Robot. They were doing, or that's a TV show, but they were like marking that there's a wireless connection point here that's open because a lot of times people do have wireless connection points. Maybe your neighbor, if you don't have a password, maybe they've already got you. Maybe they were war sitting, uh, probably not war walking, in which your network came up as unprotected and now they have free internet based off of you. But a hacker will use these because they're not trying to do this from their own home, right? They're trying to find an open place that they can conduct their attacks from. Then we have packet sniffing. So, packet sniffing is a wireless attack where an attacker uses a protocol analyzer to capture data and register flows. So, attackers can analyze the data that comes in on the captured packet and get information and glean analysis to launch more of an effective attack on the network. Um, there's packet sniffing can also help organizations monitor their own networks against attackers. Um, it's possible to do this on a wired network, but it's not that easy because yeah, you'd have to put like something there um, to tap it. Um, Initialization vector attacks. So IV attacks. So in encryption, um, in encryption, an initialization vector is a number added to a key that constantly changes in order to prevent identical information from producing the exact same ciphertext um, upon encryption, right? So it makes it more difficult for an attacker to figure out encrypted information that gets repeated. So an IV attack is going to allow the attacker to predict or control that initialization vector to bypass that effect. So IVs are going to be more likely to be compromised if they're constructed with small bits, small length key bits, right? So, for example, a modern computer system has no trouble cracking a 24-bit IV, right? Initialization vector. So in this case, the attacker has controlled this initialization vector to be C461E. And so this way he can more readily figure out what the encryption process is going to look like. So that way he can get the information that he wants. Wireless replay attacks. So when you have weak or no wireless encryption, it's a lot easier for people to capture traffic, and then they can replay them or maybe manipulate the data. So yeah, in this case, he logs on at 10, and the attacker was sitting here listening. And at 1 o'clock, the attacker goes ahead and uses those credentials that he replays them, right? And he goes and puts them in himself at 3 hours later. Then we have WEP and WPA attacks. So, WEP, or wired equivalency privacy, it was the earliest algorithm used to secure wireless networks. So, this method of encryption was meant to match the security that wired connections had at that time. So, it had 64-bit keys, 128-bit keys, 256-bit keys, and it used a stream cipher to encrypt the data. So WP was relying on IIV initialization vectors to randomize strings of text, and it had a 24-bit key size. So with the fact that it had such a small key size, it was extremely vulnerable to initialization vector attacks. And so that way people were able to predict the IV value. And so now there's even freely available software that's just cracks WP encryptions in minutes, right, on standard hardware. So because, well, not even just now, but way back then when they were using this, they were able to do this. So because of that vulnerability, WP was deprecated in 2004. And if it ever asks you on your test, um, what's the best way to encrypt your algorithm, I mean, your wireless connection? Never pick WEP. All right, remember that. Never pick WEP. Uh, then WEP was superseded by WPA, and that stands for Wi-Fi Protected Access. Um, and so WPA is going to generate a 128-bit key for each individual packet sent, which is supposed to help prevent easy cracking. And then WPA also used a RC4 stream cipher. However, we have WPA2 now, which uses AES, and that's Advanced Encryption Standard, for its encryption. So WPA is still vulnerable to attack, though. So users that are going to secure their WPA networks with weak passwords are going to be susceptible to brute forcing attacks. Um, Also, WPA has a potential weakness in the fact that um, people can inject malicious packets into the data stream. However, WPA2 is the current most um, secure wireless encryption protocol, and it should be used instead of WPA. Then we have WPS attacks. So WPS is Wi-Fi protected setups. Um, it's a wireless attack where the attacker leverages the insecure nature of WPS that allows network connections to be based on an 8-bit pin, and this is going to actually drastically reduce the number of attempts that it takes to crack that pin, right? Um, so the way WPS checks itself is to check each half of the pin. So it only takes a few thousand guesses to successfully crack that pin. So it's not going to take long. I think it comes freely in Kali Linux to do that. So the WPS feature is on by default in most systems, so you should be disabling that to prevent any security breach. However, some devices aren't gonna allow it to be disabled. So in that case, what you're gonna do is make sure that people can't actually access the button at least, right? And WPS, that's the things. The That's the button on your router sometimes that you have. Some devices will be like press this button within 5 minutes. That is WPS. And we have wireless disassociation. So a wireless disassociation attack is where an attacker spoofs the MAC address of a wireless access point to force a target to try and reassociate with another wireless access point, right? And so um, here we have a wireless device and it is associated with this access point. The attacker is going to try to force it to disassociate with this access point and associate it with the attacker, all right? And then that way the attacker can get the information that the attacker wants. Then we have activity of identifying wireless threats. Your manager has asked you to set up the wireless network, and you're going to be faced with security issues during startup. You are going to want to identify what the issues are. Physical threats and vulnerabilities. So, in addition to the general types of threats and vulnerabilities that we talked about, there are physical threats and vulnerabilities, right? And so this could be general threats associated with risk assessment, right? This could be unauthorized access to our facilities. This could be environmental issues. Maybe we had a hurricane, an earthquake, a fire, or it could be equipment theft. People steal stuff and try to get some cash for it. Or they might just want to, maybe this is corporate espionage and they're trying to sell information to interested parties. Or maybe this is, somebody stealing proprietary U.S. government information and selling it to China, right? Those are all physical threats and vulnerabilities. So we have hardware attacks. So a hardware attack, according to CompTIA, is an attack that targets a computer's physical components and peripherals. So it includes its hard disk, its motherboard, its keyboard, its network cabling, or hardware smart card readers. So in this case, the person may be trying to destroy the hardware, right? They may be trying to make important data on devices unavailable through theft or vandalism. Um, but also they may be trying to disrupt the company's business and um, or cause embarrassment due to any data loss, right? When it comes to environmental threats and vulnerabilities, there are a ton, right? So we have fires. Fires could be natural, they could be deliberately set. It's hazardous to our people and our systems. It can destroy the data and the hardware that's in it. In this case, in order to prevent this, we need to install systems that are fire resistant and install high quality fire detection and suppression systems, especially since we're dealing with computers. We can't just spray a whole bunch of water on it because that would destroy our stuff just as much as the fire would, right? Then we have catastrophic weather events. So tornadoes and hurricanes can be catastrophic. They can cause end of life. They can cause severe damage to hardware and data. We're going to want to ensure that our information systems are well contained and that our physical structure is built with the appropriate codes and standards so that we don't receive any damage due to severe weather. In California, they have different standards for building um, facilities because of the threat of earthquakes that we may not have here on the East Coast, right? So we're going to want to work with our own individual ecosystem, um, local ecosystem, that is. Um, we could have what else on catastrophic? We could have floods. We can have extreme temperatures. Um, Heat can cause some of our sensitive data to melt and degrade. We could lose data that way. Humidity can corrode our data. It cause our devices to rust. So we're going to want to make sure we have enough ventilation in our data system by using temperature and humidity controls in this case. Um, we could have floods. Um, a flood is going to be a major security threat. We need to check the history of the area that we're in and make sure that we're not in a floodplain before we construct any building. We need to make sure that we have flood insurance. We want to make sure that our data center is not on the lowest floor. That way, if flooding does occur, our systems aren't lost, right? And we already talked about extreme temperature and extreme humidity. These can both destroy our equipment. Then we have our final activity of the chapter. It is identifying physical threats. The security manager has asked you to complete a report on on physical security risks. You have a list of scenarios to identify as either a true threat or a false alarm. If it's a true threat, you'll also identify internal versus external and natural versus man-made.